Popular Mechanics Magazine, Volume 99, March 1953, Number 3. In this issue, 36-inch model of the SS United States Part 4, page 179. To resume work on your model of America's mighty speed queen of the seas, the SS United States, the finishing touches are added to the stacks in readiness for final assembly. These include the ventilators, whistles, antenna brackets, and lookout tower. The ventilators are simulated with sections of ribbed plastic, which are cemented, flush in recesses in the stacks and the decks to which the stacks are glued. The details below, which include actual size profile views of both stacks, give the sizes of the ventilators and show where they are located on each side. To correct an error in the depth of the notch at the base of the aft stack, which was previously given as 1/8 inch, the notch should be measured at 3/8 inch, as shown here. Each stack is masked and painted red, white, and blue, a band of white separating the other colors as shown in the detail. As indicated, the dome of each stack and its smoke stack deflector fins are painted dark blue. And in the case of each color, the ventilators are painted over and later cleaned of paint by running a pin of grooves in the plastic. The antenna brackets are made of fine wire and soldered together in the form of a tripod, after which each bracket is inserted in tiny holes drilled in opposite sides of the stacks. Tiny brass locomotive whistles are used for the stack whistles, 2 being fitted in the forestack and 1 in the aft. Finally, the lookout tower is added atop the forestack. Each stack and the deck house at which it rests is made up as a complete unit, fully painted and set aside for final assembly. You'll note, in the case of the aft stack deck house, that in addition to the railing, a brass bulwark is cemented to the fore end of the deck house. The forestack deck house is painted white all over, as if deck house itself. However, the top of the sports deck, on which the deck house rests, is painted dark green, while the sides, railing, and bulwark are painted white. Perhaps the most tedious part of building the entire model is fabricating the tiny railings which skirt the various decks. The drawing at the left pictures individual each deck. The superstructure shows just where the railings go. In addition to these railings, there are one on the stern of the hull on both the starboard and port sides of the sports deck at the bow. With the exception of the wheelhouse decking and the one with the metal promenade deck, which consists of 4 horizontal wires, all of the railings are made up of 3 brass wires. The full-size section of rail pictured below, the soldering jig is typical and gives the proper 1/4 inch spacing. Where railing is added to wooden decks, every 4th post is left projecting about 1/4 inch. For installing the railing as close to the edge of the deck of the hull as possible, in the case of metal decks, all posts are snipped off evenly and flush with the bottom wire to permit soldering in place. In all cases, the bottom wire of the railings rests directly on the deck. The step block soldering jig provides one way of making the railings, but other methods may be worked out by the builder. When a jig is made of aluminum, the solder will not adhere, nor will the jig burn, although you can get by the hardwood jig, which will last quite a while before becoming charred and requiring replacement. A small strip of aluminum placed under the wires at the point of soldering will make the jig last longer. The holes in a jig should be the size to allow the wires to pass through snugly. The steps in the jig automatically space the posts uniformly and position them accurately. Solder is flowed sparingly over each intersection of the wires using a small tip solder iron. Later, the solder joints are cleaned up with a thin, flat file. Study of the various photos will orient you in just where the railings are added. All railings are painted white. The openings in the railings are later fitted with tiny stars. These are located according to the plan view in Part 1. The metal deck of the wheelhouse, which overhangs the sides of the ladder, about 1/16 of an inch, is cemented to the wheelhouse, and then the small pieces of brass are bent to conform to the shape at the aft end and cemented flush with the edges. Note the small doors are represented here, which are merely pieces of thin cardboard cemented into place. Portholes are added to the wheelhouse at the points indicated and shown in the front of the wheelhouse. A small window is represented by a strip of plastic scored on the back and painted black. Before cementing it in a recess, a porthole is added to each end of the window. Similar windows are set flush in recesses on both sides of the end of the stern as indicated in the detail at the bottom of the page. In addition to the windows, chocks are also installed at the stern on a line below the windows, and are likewise set in recesses. A tiny chisel will be required to cut the recesses for the windows, first tracing around the plastic strips with the point of a knife and then carefully cleaning out the waste. Openings for the chocks are made similarly by first drilling a series of overlapping holes. Before the brass promenade deck is permanently fitted on top of the upper deck, small cross wires are added to the inside of the openings in the brass enclosure strips, attaching them to either with cement or solder. The fore end of the wooden promenade deck is fitted with bulwarks which conform to the rounded end and blend into the windows for a distance of 2 3/4 inch along each side. It will facilitate painting, and a neater job will result if you finish each deck as it is completed. Except for the aft portion of the wheelhouse deck and the sun deck of the raised promenade deck, which are painted white. All decks in the model are painted dark green. The davits are white, and the lifeboats are painted aluminum. The latter are suspended from the davits with very fine wire, threading it through holes in the davits, the eyes already cast in the lifeboats. To keep the boats in neat straight rows, place a drop of airplane cement on the wires to hold them rigidly. In studying the photo at the top of the opposite page, you'll notice that 3 portholes are fitted in the aft ends of the upper deck. If you find that the bow bulwark is difficult to shape thin enough without breaking, you can use a strip of brass for this, as detailed below, fitting it with flush in a shallow rabbet. This bulwark maintains the same outward flare of the hull. 4 deck fittings consist of 2 raised hatches, set lengthwise and in line with 2 deck houses. The foremost deck house is fitted with 2 bulwarks, which are cemented to the leading faces of the house and extended to butt against the deck railings. A small door is simulated on each side with thin cardboard. Both deck houses are painted white with all over, while raised hatches are done in white around the edges and painted gray on top. The sizes of the hatches as well as the deck houses were given in Part 2. Part 5, the concluding article of this series, will explain how the final fittings are added and will show you how to make a protective glass case for your completed model. To be continued next month.